This video documents the entire process of how to draw a fashion croquis, so let's do this. So that's the picture I'm going to be using today, and I'm going to start off by taking the top and the bottom and dividing it in half. So my sheet is 11 inches across, so I'm going to mark at 5.5 inches the top, and now the bottom. Ooh, that was fast. So now I'm going to draw a line down the middle, and I'm going to mark every inch. And now I'm going to move it down 2 inches. I'm going to start from 0 to 9 and start numbering each one of those inches. And those are going to be our guides today. So I'm bringing my picture over. I'm going to be using my ruler and seeing what kind of angle my shoulder is. So the right one is lower than the left. So I have to determine how low it is, like how much of an angle. And now I'm going to replicate it as much as possible on line 1.5. So my head is going to be 0 to 1, and I'm going to make my, instead of a 1/4 inch, I'm going to make my neck 1/2 inch, so it's much more dramatic. So I've drawn a straight line across, and it's 3/4 on each side, totaling at 1.5 inches long. And now I'm just in the process of making little markers. So I'm going to mark every 1/8 of an inch, just a couple notches, and just eyeball it and see, compare to the picture, what the angle should be on my paper so it looks exact. Clean that up. I'm going to do my waist, and that's 1/2 inch on both sides, so your waist is about 1 inch. Now I usually end up making it smaller, so I usually take about 1/16 off both sides, or maybe more. I kind of just eyeball it. I like a very dramatic hourglass silhouette. So now I'm doing the same thing I did to my shoulders, and I'm doing it to my hips. I'm going to see how much of an angle it is, because she's leaning on her right hip, or rather her left in the picture, but it's in the picture it's her right, and that's how I'm drawing it. So I'm figuring out what that angle is now. Now the thing with this is I'm going to be moving these up, because that intersecting line on the line that we drew down the middle of the page has to be exactly on. So I'm moving that up so that the middle of that hip line that's going horizontally is going to match the vertical line exactly at its marker. So the hip is actually at line number 4, the waist is at line number 3, and the shoulders are at 1.5. Now I'm going to just show you roughly how that curve's going to look from the shoulder to the waist and the waist out to the hip. So it's kind of going to look like an S. Out and then in, and then out again for the hips. So I'm going to draw from the middle of my hip line for the right side, because that's the straightest one. I'm going to draw roughly what it looks like, how it's bending or how it's tilted. She's leaning on her right leg, so I'm going to draw a couple of joints at her knees, which are at line 6. And that is just my guideline on how my legs are going to look, so that I can follow along. And I'm going to probably end up changing this a little bit, fine-tuning it, making sure it's exact as possible. Now I'm going to pull over my picture, and I'm going to reference the leg that's bent. So the inside of the knee and the outside of the knee, I want to get the angle and the look of it exactly, and that's going to be on line 6. So I'm just going to draw that in. And now I'm going to mark where the calves are going to be. Now in the book, the 9 heads, it says 7.25 to 7.5 is where your calves are going to be the thickest. But I usually end up putting it at 7, because then the legs look longer and leaner. So right now I'm just going to draw that. The front of the leg is usually very straight. There's like a little indent because it's coming from the knee and it's going straight into the leg. And then the calf is mostly on the back. So I'm going to draw that in. Now it's going to take a lot of perfecting because you won't necessarily get it on the first try. So don't worry about it. You're using pencil and an eraser. That's what they're for. And there's that little hand just so you can see what the shape is. That's what you're kind of working around. So now I'm going to bring over my ruler and I'm going to start marking for the crotch area. So from that line 4 where your hip is, you're going to mark down 1/4 of an inch for your crotch. Yes, I said crotch. Even our teachers were surprised, like surprising us when they said it. It is what it is. And for the hips, you're going to mark 1/4 inch up. And I'm going to draw for you what that's going to be. So right now I'm just marking those lines. And from the outside, you're going to go around the leg. And you're going to go in like a U for the crotch area. So just fix that up a little bit. Because sometimes your lines end up like scratches instead of one fluid line. And for me, that can be very distracting. So I'm just fixing that up. Now I'm going to draw from the waist to the hip on the other side. And around the leg. And then in again. So that's what your underwear line is going to be. So now from the hip to the leg, go in a little bit at the hip and then around the thigh, in a little bit at the crotch, out again around the thigh. Fix that up again. So that's that big thigh kind of bubble that you're working around. You're always drawing around those body parts. So now, because my waist happens to be straight, I'm just extending that line because that's the reference line I'm going to use for my elbows. Because your armhole from the top of your shoulder to the underarm is 1/2 inch, and then your top arm is 1 inch, and then your bottom arm below the elbow is 1 inch as well. So technically you can count them as heads as well because your head is supposed to be 1 inch from line 0 to 1, and that's the references that you have for your body. So your crotch is where your wrist stops, and then from your wrist to your knuckles is about 1/2 inch, or almost 1/4 really. You can decide how big you want your hands, but if you want it proportionally, just eyeball it. Everyone's different. So I drew both my hands, and now I'm using my rulers because I want them to be exactly. Now I've decided that I'm going to make it about 1 1/4 inch for top and bottom of the arm. And because, see, I originally marked it just slightly above that waistline because she's bent her arm, but because her that shoulder that she's leaning on is also lower than the other one, so that kind of brings it down. So you kind of just have to play with it until it looks right. So the head is from 0 to 1, and you're going to draw an oval, and then for the neck, you're going to continue that line. You're not going to go in. You're going to continue that line, and you're going to draw to the shoulder. So I'm demonstrating how you continue the line from your head to your neck. You're not going in, and you're just connecting the dots with some curves. So this is the end of part 1, and I hope that you continue on to the part 2. Thank you for watching.